A tourist spat in the direction of a royal guard, believing he could get away with anything. But one step forward from the guard changed everything. What happened next became a lesson for everyone. Let's start from the beginning. It was an ordinary morning outside Buckingham Palace, where the air itself seemed steeped in grandeur and tradition. The golden gates gleamed under the morning sun, and the royal guard stood like motionless statues at their posts. Every gesture they made symbolized discipline and honor. For most tourists, this was simply part of the cultural spectacle, but for these soldiers, it was a duty rooted in centuries-old customs. Among the guards stood our protagonist, a tall, well-built man with a face as stoic as stone. His posture was so commanding that even the trees in the park across the street seemed to straighten in his presence. His red uniform shone, and his bearskin hat added an air of solemnity, as if he bore the weight of history itself. The crowd photographed him, admired him, and whispered in awe, "Such composure!" However, not everyone viewed the moment with reverence. Through the chatter of the crowd came a loud, self-assured voice dripping with mockery. It belonged to a man in his 40s, dressed in a bright t-shirt emblazoned with London rules, a sight at odds with the elegance of the setting. He laughed boisterously, demanding attention as if the scene before the palace existed solely for his amusement. "Hey, you there, human statue," he shouted with a smirk. "Smile for once, or people will think you're a wax figure from Madame Tussauds." The crowd fell silent, waiting for a reaction. But the guard, ever the professional, didn't flinch. His expression remained as still as the palace facade behind him. And this is where things began to get interesting. You see, this tourist, our story's self-satisfied antagonist, was the kind of person who believed the world revolved around him. He fancied himself not just the star of his trip, but the protagonist of the universe itself. In his mind, it was simple. He was a tourist. He paid for the experience, and therefore, he was entitled to anything, even to disregard centuries-old traditions. "Well, are you even alive? Maybe give us a wave or something?" he pressed on, winking at his companion holding a camera. The crowd exchanged glances. Some chuckled, others turned away in discomfort. A few were outright indignant, whispering, "That's so disrespectful." Yes, dear reader, you're probably thinking the same thing. Seriously, is he really acting like this? That's crossing the line. Who does that? You and I both understand. The Royal Guard is not a troop of clowns on demand. But alas, this tourist seemed to live in a world of his own. The guard remained standing, unshaken, as immovable as a marble statue. The irony of the situation was that his calm demeanor only served to make the tourist look foolish in front of the crowd. But our antagonist, of course, failed to notice. He only laughed louder, taunting the man he saw as nothing more than part of a free show. And you, dear reader, are probably starting to boil with frustration, aren't you? That's the exact feeling of injustice that scenes like this are meant to evoke. The spectacle continued. Cameras rolled, murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and the very air seemed to thicken, forewarning that something more than silence from the guard was on the horizon. "He's just a robot," the tourist added, spreading his arms theatrically, like this was his stage. By now, the audience understood. Something was bound to happen. And though the guard remained silent, it was clear that even the most steadfast patience has its limits. The guard stood his ground, the embodiment of calm and discipline. He didn't avert his gaze, even as the tourist's behavior grew bolder. But if you thought this man was done, you'd be overestimating his grasp on common sense. "What's the matter? Are you just going to stand there like a rock? Entertain us!" The tourist jeered, his voice ringing across the square. Even the pigeons seemed momentarily stunned by his arrogance. He glanced at the crowd, expecting their support. To his disappointment, the response was mixed. Some recorded the scene on their phones, others exchanged disapproving looks, though a few chuckled, enabling his attempts to break the system. "Seriously? Is he a robot? Or do they zap you with electricity to keep you still?" he continued, oblivious to the growing irritation around him. Confidence swelled with every word. In his mind, the logic was simple. He was a tourist. He'd paid for his trip, so he had the right to demand a performance. Who were these guards if not pretty decorations? And this is where you, dear reader, likely start to fume. This is just outrageous, you might think. And you'd be absolutely right. This man embodied everything we find maddening about certain tourists: the disregard for tradition, the utter lack of tact, and the unshakable belief in their own importance. The guard remained unyielding. His stone-faced expression only highlighted the contrast between the dignity of tradition and the chaotic foolishness of the antagonist. Of course, this only fueled the tourist's bravado. He stepped closer, his face a mix of mockery and defiance. The crowd tensed. Someone whispered, "He's too close." Others, however, leaned in with anticipation. In today's world, it seems capturing the moment on video outweighs preventing a disaster. And then it happened. The tourist, in a display of ultimate arrogance, spat in the direction of the guard. Yes, spat. This was the moment when the entire square seemed to freeze, as if history itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The crowd gasped. Even the children who had been trying to catch the guard's attention minutes earlier now stood in stunned silence. "Who does that?" was the unspoken question that hung in the air. All eyes turned to the soldier. What would he do? Could he endure such blatant disrespect? And do you know what the guard did? Absolutely nothing. Not a single emotion crossed his face. His unflinching stoicism was the perfect response to such insolence. But if you think this composure pacified the tourist, you'd be sorely mistaken. "Oh, what's the matter? Too proud to react even to that?" The man sneered, growing more animated. "Should I dance for you too, just to get a response?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some shouted in the guard's defense. "Hey, stop it!" a woman called from the second row. "This has gone too far!" But alas, reason was drowned out by the man's thirst for cheap attention. Perhaps he thought he was being clever. Perhaps he imagined his antics would go viral. But you and I, of course, know better. He looked nothing short of pitiful. So pitiful, in fact, that even those who initially laughed at his antics now turned away in disdain. As for the guard, he stood firm, unwavering, embodying a strength of spirit that far surpassed any act of idiocy. His resolve was a testament to the enduring power of discipline and tradition. The crowd held its breath as the guard finally broke his stoic stance. His sharp, deliberate step forward was like a lightning strike, instant and precise. Those who had been whispering or recording on their cameras instinctively recoiled. The tourist, feeling the ground metaphorically give way beneath him, reflexively stepped back, his confidence now visibly faltering. "Step back behind the line," boomed the guard's authoritative voice. It was a voice of steel, leaving no room for argument. His words echoed across the square like a general's command on the battlefield. Even those who had initially laughed at the situation suddenly realized the gravity of the moment. The tourist, clearly unprepared for this reaction, froze in place. His face twisted into an awkward grin, trying to mask his unease. "Oh, come on! Can't you just relax? I was only joking." His voice, now quieter and less certain, seemed like a weak attempt at justification, not just to the guard, but to the crowd that had already turned against him. The guard took another step forward, and in that moment, it became clear that this wasn't just a movement. It was a demonstration of absolute control. His gaze, intense and unwavering, pierced through the tourist, shattering what remained of his bravado. The guard said nothing more. His silence, filled with strength and dignity, spoke louder than any words ever could. A child in the crowd suddenly yelled, "That's right! You deserved it!" This moment became the turning point. The crowd erupted in applause. Some people whistled, others shouted words of support. Cameras shifted their focus, from the now deflated tourist to the guard, who had become the day's undeniable hero. The tourist, realizing the crowd's support had slipped through his fingers, turned pale. His hand awkwardly moved to his collar, as if he could somehow hide behind it. "Oh, come on! I was just joking," he muttered, but his words were drowned out by the approving cheers of the crowd. Now, he looked as out of place as someone showing up to a wedding in beach shorts. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get more humiliating for the tourist, a security officer appeared. His steps were unhurried but resolute. Addressing the tourist politely but firmly, he said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." His tone left no room for negotiation. The tourist glanced at the security officer, then at the guard, and finally at the crowd. In that instant, his cocky demeanor dissolved entirely. "But he started, but the officer simply gestured toward the exit. Without further protest, the tourist turned and walked away, his steps quick and almost hurried. The crowd watched him go, but now without interest. Their attention was fully captured by the guard, who, as if nothing had happened, adjusted his bearskin hat and resumed his post. A sense of justice filled the air. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Well done!" prompting another wave of applause. In that moment, everyone present felt like they had witnessed something far greater than just a display of discipline. It was a reminder that respect and tradition stand tall against even the most brazen disrespect. As for the tourist, his retreat was memorable only for how nervously he glanced over his shoulder, clearly aware that today's events would not be a cherished memory. The guard returned to his post as if nothing had happened. His steps were measured and deliberate, his face once again a stoic mask. The only movement he allowed himself was a dignified adjustment of his bearskin hat, a gesture full of poise and tranquility. The crowd, which had been a cauldron of emotions just moments before, erupted into applause. This was a triumph of tradition over modern arrogance. People began taking photos, not for amusement this time, but to capture the image of a true hero. Their gazes, once fleeting and casual, were now filled with respect. Some even gave small bows, acknowledging the importance of the guard's role and the dignity with which he carried it out. "That's true strength of spirit," someone in the crowd exclaimed, sparking a new round of discussions. People talked not about the tourist, but about how the guard had upheld the honor and dignity of his duty. And the tourist? He disappeared as quickly as he could, his steps a reflection of his humiliation, hurried and awkward. But the consequences of his actions lingered in the form of videos that quickly spread across social media. By evening, the incident was being discussed by thousands. Videos shot by onlookers had gone viral in mere hours. Headlines captured the moment perfectly. "Royal Guard puts disrespectful tourist in his place." A lesson in respect, guard maintains dignity under pressure. The comment sections were equally clear. "This tourist is a disgrace to his country," one user raged, garnering hundreds of likes. "The guard showed what true strength looks like," another chimed in, echoing the general sentiment. The most popular comment was succinct and to the point. "Now that's real dignity." Sardonic remarks about the tourist's behavior proliferated. "Hope he reads up on local traditions before his next trip." "Next time, let him argue with a London bus. The result will be the same." The following day, to everyone's surprise, flowers appeared in front of the guard's post. Someone had left a note that read, "Thank you for reminding us what respect looks like. You're an inspiration to us all." The guard, ever stoic, accepted the gesture with his usual composure. But for those paying close attention, a faint shadow of a smile seemed to flicker across his face. The crowd once again gathered to take photos, but the atmosphere had changed. There was no laughter or disrespect, only admiration and reverence. This was a day that reminded everyone why traditions matter and why dignity cannot be bought. As the guard resumed his motionless stance, someone in the crowd softly said, "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words."